We are live, I think. It looks like we're live here. Don't know about Instagram. Looks like that didn't work out. Oh, nope, there we are. Now we're live here too. Awesome. So, let's see here. Now that we're live here on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and everywhere else, make sure this is good here. It's live in the live chat. And yep, looks like. Yep, okay, good. Okay, so we have sound, we have vision, we're good to go. All right, so we have a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. Part of it is the latest on what to expect for the hurricane season. We're going to discuss the climatology involved in that. So that way you understand where we're at in terms of what to expect and how to expect it. And we're going to talk about the evolution of the pattern. And of course, as always, take your questions. So far this spring, we've seen a battle between the tropical air and the maritime air. And so far, the maritime air has been winning, especially from about central New Jersey on northward through New York City and Long Island. Philadelphia, southern New Jersey has remained in the more tropical air mass. So, with that, now we're going to start to see more and more support for that tropical air mass as La Nina and the negative PDO sync up. And we start to see changes in the polar and in the subtropical jet stream. But before we get to that, let's talk about what to expect with the hurricane season. Now, this is not the official forecast yet. I expect to have that out probably by May 15th, the official forecast out with numbers and all that good stuff. Some changes that was made to the premium section of dashboards in respect of, well, pretty much there's a pretty good chance we're going to be pretty active this year. What I've done is set up the tropical update for overall forecast, going over the activity, and then individual storms will also have their own section in the dashboard. That way you can go directly to the information that you're looking for. There's going to be a chance this year where we might have 3-4 named storms, and it can get pretty complicated as far as what's going on. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And so because of that, I decided to try to make this as easy as possible for premium consultant members to follow. Along with that, I also want to mention, just so I don't forget, by special request, I've added a section at the top of the dashboard for those of you who, let's say, are landscaping professionals, or if you just want to know whether or not you could put out your favorite plants and whether or not there's going to be any rain for the next 24 hours. I put up a little meter on the top there so you can see what the threat for rainfall is, if it's minor. This isn't to tell you not to do work. That's up to you. I'm just going to tell you what the rain chance is. That's all. So now let's get to the Atlantic hurricane season. Typically, what we see is a peak of our hurricane season in late August through September. Okay, September is usually very, very active. That's usually our peak, right around September 9th, 10th. But that doesn't mean you can't get tropical systems. Now, out towards May and early June, this is where you're more likely to get your subtropical low pressure systems. And we'll talk about that in just a moment, the different type of structures. As you get further out, this time period from June to, let's say, July 15th, it's more a hit and miss. You get a lot of low pressure systems developing off of old cold front boundaries, lingering upper level lows that start to transition over to tropical lows, but not your true Cape Verde season. That's where you have waves coming off the African coast. Once you get past July 15th, all the way on through November 1st, this is when pretty much every wave that comes off the African coast you have to really keep an eye on. And that's where you can start to get your major hurricanes because they start to develop around the Cape Verde Islands or out towards the central tropical Atlantic. And they have all of that warm water to feed on. And if you don't have any dry air to interrupt it and no shear, these storms can grow pretty significantly. As you head towards the end of the season, from let's say November 1st to December 1st, you lose the potential for tropical systems, but during La Nina years, because you have that southeast ridge protecting the Caribbean, protecting the Gulf of Mexico, you can still get tropical low pressure systems spawning and creating issues. So during La Nina years, I'm more concerned of this time period than I am during El Nino years. El Nino years, you tend to have a stronger subtropical jet stream, shearing everything apart. Your cold fronts are able to press further south, so it's not as significant of a threat. But during La Nina years, where you have that buffer with the ridge over the southeast and around the Caribbean, you can end up with those tropical low pressure systems. Scrolling down a bit, this is great data. By the way, this is from the nhc.noaa.gov. You can just take a look at the climatology and you can go over all of this yourself as well. It gives you historical data on storms that developed. This goes from 1851 to 2015, which is still pretty good. It needs to be updated, but still, I mean, by 2025, they'll probably have a complete new update to span this climatology. But you can see you can break it down by 10-day periods, which is excellent. It's really, really a fun thing to check out and study. But what I want to do, I want to scroll down here and get to the overall climatology. And this is hurricanes and this is named storms. Important note with the named storms. In years past, let's say 1980s, 1990s, when you had subtropical storms, they were numbered, not named. Then we started naming them for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into. Some I agree with, some I don't. But the fact we're naming subtropical storms makes this climatology in June very important, especially during La Nina years. What we're going to be watching out for, and you can expand this into May as well, is any type of cold front that kind of stalls out around the Gulf of Mexico or off the East Coast around the Carolinas is going to have the potential for low pressure systems to fester. Now, when this happens, you typically have a trough of low pressure, an upper level trough passing off the coast, and you have below normal heights, right? So you have this low pressure system, you have a weak circulation, you got a frontal boundary hanging around there, and then you have very warm water. So the lower 500 millibar heights with the trough passing through, not significantly lower, just marginally lower, and the weak surface low pressure system, all via a thermal gradient, okay, it is driven by cold core processes, lingers over the coastal waters around, let's say, the Gulf Stream. As this lingers, it starts to develop more and more warm core processes. So what happens is that your low pressure system starts to feed off of the very warm waters over the Gulf Stream. And while that's happening, it transitions and builds a warm core circulation and starts to be driven more by the development of convection. So the latent heat release leads it to a transition to a hybrid storm with a cold core circulation, let's say at 500 millibars down to, well, let's say 250 millibars down to, let's say, roughly 850 millibars, and then the warm core structure driven by convection from the surface up to 850 millibars. So it features those two processes at the same time, making it a subtropical low pressure system. As it festers over the Gulf Stream or over the coastal waters where temperatures are in the 80s, as far as the sea surface temperatures, that allows for that warm core structure to expand and grow. And so that allows it to transition into a warm core low pressure system. During this time period, let's say from mid-May through June, that process becomes the leading factor to support the development of tropical low pressure systems. So you can easily add 1 to 3 named storms of weak tropical storms during this time period right off the bat. When we get to July, that's when we start to see a greater development of tropical systems over the Western Atlantic. Now, if you have a La Nina in place, you can see where you have your ridge starting to build here. You have support here in the Gulf of Mexico, and you start to introduce support around the Caribbean islands, especially around the Lesser and Greater Antilles, right around here. So what typically happens is that your intertropical convergence zone is still south of 10 degrees north. What you want, when we get to the Cape Verde season, the ITZ starts to lift to north of this line, which I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. While that's starting to lift northward, you start to get tropical waves start to drift a little bit above the intertropical convergence zone, and that's when we can start to see weak low pressure systems develop out in this neck of the woods. During this time period, June and July, you still have influence from the Sahara dust, which again we'll show in just a moment, right as it is right now. The Sahara dust tends to limit tropical low pressure systems, whether you have El Nino or La Nina, but it becomes more of an inhibiting factor during the early portion of tropical season with La Ninas. So this is one of the factors we're going to be watching very carefully to see how much it lingers and how much it starts to change. Now we start getting into the Cape Verde season. This is where we start to see our tropical waves coming off the African coast. Notice where we start to see the development, all north of 10 degrees north. Why? Because the intertropical convergence zone starts to lift northward. So this is the next phase we're going to be watching out for. And during La Nina years, when the shear is very weak, and in this case, right now, we have very warm waters over the Atlantic. This is why so many meteorologists are very concerned, because you have very warm waters, you have low shear, and your intertropical convergence zone is going to be able to feed off of those favorable conditions. And so this is where you have the potential for a lot of storms to really get their act together. And you can have Cape Verde storms lift up towards the Caribbean, towards the Bahamas, and of course there's a threat for the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico. In September, this is where we're at our peak. Same setup. Again, the intertropical convergence zone is very active. You're getting storms that are capable of lifting up the coast, heading towards the Gulf of Mexico, or staying out to sea. But in a very favorable environment, you have a lot of activity, a lot of potential here. And so at this point, then it's a matter of trying to understand the interaction between various tropical systems, dry air, interaction with land. The reason why I say that is that you will not find me going over top and say like this is going to be the worst season ever or anything of that nature, because there's far too many factors to consider when you're making this forecast. But during this time period, the intertropical convergence zone is far enough north to maximize all of the potential favorable conditions. Then October, we start to back off. Now you might wonder, hey, why am I seeing more focus out here and not so much out here? Well, by the time we get to October, we start to get our cold fronts start to push off the coast again. And much like what we have in June and early July, you can have cold fronts stall and fester over the Western Atlantic and start that process of starting off maybe as first a cold core system, taking on subtropical characteristics, and then going over to tropical. You start to see that a lot. In fact, Sandy started off as a disturbance that was festering to the south of Cuba, kind of festering out here, and then it started to drift northward, and, well, you know the rest. And then finally, November, where we're technically at the end of the season, same thing. We're not really seeing a lot of development out here in the intertropical convergence zone because it starts to drop south of 10 north, and what you're going to be watching out for is old cold front boundaries out in this neck of the woods here that can spawn low pressure systems, tropical low pressure systems, or subtropical low pressure systems. You might have a remnant low pressure system sitting out here. You're less likely to get a storm impacting the United States, although it's not impossible, because by this point you have strong troughs diving into the eastern United States. Let's just say, let's assume it's a transient low pressure trough, which in other words, what that means is that it constantly is moving. It's not sustained, right? So even in that scenario, the troughs are strong enough and deep enough that they kick out any tropical low pressure system that tries to approach by the time we get to November. So that's usually the climatology involved in a hurricane season and the different phases of the hurricane season as we study it. Now, one of the factors we're going to be watching out for is our development of La Nina, our negative PDO, and what's going on in the Atlantic. So why is everyone very concerned about the upcoming hurricane season? Because, I mean, we've had La Ninas before, so why all of the focus this year? Well, the concern here is what's showing up here in the Atlantic. These anomalies are already well above normal. So the problem here is that you have a lot of potential fuel for these storms. So when you take a look at these anomalies and you study them and you look at what previous seasons featured with La Ninas, all different types of La Ninas, all different strengths, it led to above normal seasons. That I don't think is in dispute in any way, shape, or form. But with this type of above normal sea surface temperatures, there is the potential here for a lot of these storms to be able to rapidly intensify and for more disturbances along the intertropical convergence zone to take advantage of these favorable environments. Meanwhile, as you can see, our La Nina is starting to grow and starting to develop very nicely. A couple of weeks ago, we started looking at the La Nina development, and it was just a little wisp of little blue out here. Now it's growing and it's intensifying. I expect it to continue to grow. But when will we start to see the changes in the atmosphere? Okay, that's a great question because that's going to tell us and that's going to help us determine what type of evolution we can expect by the time we get to late May and June. And what I've been watching is the SOI. The SOI is still featuring El Nino-like conditions, okay, in the monthly and seasonal values, not strong in any way, shape, or form. And we're trending towards neutral, but we're in no way, shape, or form anywhere near a La Nina state. So that tells me there's some work to be done in the atmosphere. So when will we start to see that changeover really take shape? Well, this is where I like to use angular momentum. Now, to give you an idea about angular momentum, it's basically the understanding of how the whole atmosphere is moving in relationship to the Earth, okay? When you study angular momentum, when you have an El Nino, okay, now just think about this here for a second. During El Nino, your trade winds are stronger, which pushes against the overall circulation of the Earth, okay? And that very slight push creates what we call a negative AAM, okay? It enhances our subtropical jet stream, weakens our polar jet stream, leads to more high latitude blocking potential. So it has all these different factors. When we go to a La Nina, the trade winds weaken. This is why we see very light shear in the Atlantic Ocean and why you have increased potential for tropical systems. When that happens, the AAM goes positive. So I've been keeping an eye on this for the past couple of weeks, and we're seeing this trend here of going positive towards the late part of May. Let's say somewhere between May 20th and June 5th, we should see that change really take shape. And when we see that change take shape, you'll see a fundamental shift in the jet stream dynamics over North America and over the tropical Atlantic, and the evolution of ridges. So what you're going to see is right now we kind of have a hint of a ridge over the southeast. Now what we're going to see more and more is a deeper trough in the west, stronger ridge over the Gulf Coast, building up towards the mid-Atlantic, and lighter winds over the tropical Atlantic. So what does that look like in terms of forcing? Well, what that looks like in terms of the vertical velocity is that, okay, so we're starting out here with more El Nino-like conditions, right? So this is the start of the forecast, May 1st, 2nd. So as you can see, we have more convection developing around the date line. We start to see a change in that lifting, in that vertical lifting to support convection, take shape right around May 15th or so. And when that starts to happen, notice we start to lose support for our convection. We start to get more subsidence. And so with more subsidence, this should be the sign in tropical forcing of that changeover starting to take place. So when we start to see that change, you'll start to see this intertropical convergence zone, which is down here, start to creep north very slowly. You'll start to see this jet streak back off and start to weaken. But more importantly, you'll start to lose the support of the Sahara dust. Now, right now on the infrared, you can barely see it. So let's go to another image. Here's the Sahara dust. All this out here. The way to think of Sahara dust is like diamond dust on a baseball field, right? So it dries up and kills tropical low pressure systems. That dry atmosphere basically interrupts the development of thunderstorms and develops a whole latent heat process, i.e., it's like throwing sand in your car tank, right? It's very bad. So this will inhibit and slow the development of the season. The longer this lasts, the more you'll have that limiting factor on your hurricane season. So what we're going to be watching for to change, this is winds at 850 millibars. What we're going to be watching for is for this ridge axis to start to shift. Now let me go to 850 millibars. Pardon me. Okay, so right now you have the winds coming off of the Sahara Desert, coming right into the Atlantic. What we're going to be watching for as we move through June and towards July is for this complex to start to collapse, and you end up with less of a transport coming off of the Sahara Desert and more of an influence coming off of the Central African Congo, okay, locations like that, where you're going to get more short waves and less transport of dry air. And so over the next 10 to 15 days, we can take a look at the tropics. Notice the differences. Notice how we start to see more above normal heights around the tropical Atlantic, more above normal heights start to take shape around the Gulf of Mexico, and more support for that southeast ridge. What you're going to see is this start to expand, and eventually you'll start to see a ridge build out here in the western Atlantic. And that starts to show up gradually as we move through mid-May and head towards June. This will expand, this will grow and intensify, and we'll start to see a western Atlantic ridge here. And then the question going in for the summer and also for the tropical season is whether or not, as that ridge begins to build, whether we see a weakness here around the Appalachians to support storms coming up this way, or whether that western Atlantic ridge is able to build into the Gulf of Mexico and send storms more towards the Gulf of Mexico and Mexico itself. Excuse me. Allergies have been fun, by the way. I don't know about you guys. Now we kind of got that out of the way. I'm going to take all your questions about the tropics in just a few minutes. Just want to go over the overall pattern that we have right now. Of course, we've been dealing with this pesky stationary front. It's going to be quiet heading in for the rest of the week into the weekend. Really, there isn't much in the way of any further lifting. The frontal genesis is broken up and dispersed. We don't have a great deal of moisture. We have some low-level moisture that will support some low-level clouds developing, and you can see some of that fog starting to take shape over the Atlantic. That's going to build over portions of Long Island and along the Jersey Shore once again for tomorrow morning. So probably deal with some fog, but not a lot of activity going on over North America or for our neck of the woods. It's actually pretty quiet for the most part. Yes, we have a few cold fronts that we'll be watching with a few showers, but if you're looking for severe weather, I don't know why, but if you are, you're going to have to head out towards the plains and the Mississippi River Valley. I'm not expecting much, at least through the spring, for us. Now, one thing I am noticing with our 500 millibar pattern is that with that echo of El Nino hanging around, we still have these pesky upper level lows that we're going to be dealing with, dropping in through Quebec and towards the Canadian Maritimes. And so we're going to continue to deal with that backdoor cold front threat, continuing on through the spring, possibly into the early summer. But one of the major changes that we're starting to see is more and more support for a trough over the west in both the polar and subtropical jet streams, and more building of this ridge. And so what that will lead to is a lot of moisture build up here around the Tennessee River Valley, around the southern mid-Atlantic. Our hot air mass is going to really start to establish itself along the Gulf Coast. And as we gain more support, because we have a negative PDO and because we're developing our La Nina, we're going to gain more support for this hot and humid air mass to build northward as we head towards the end of spring and towards summer. So the spring, I expect it to continue to be active and unsettled. I'm not seeing any type of major rainstorms or anything of that nature. Once we get into the summer, one of the things we're going to have to watch out for is remnant tropical low pressure systems leading to heavy rainfall events and flash flooding and urban flooding and whatnot. We're going to have to watch out for individual thunderstorm complexes, especially dealing with sea breeze fronts and stuff like that. But what we don't have to deal with is large-scale low-pressure systems like we were dealing with in March. For the rest of the spring, it's going to be pesky cold fronts, especially the warm front boundaries stalling out around our region, producing variable cloud cover, scattered showers, and 7 to 10 days out, like what we have here, is going to be more amplified on the guidance than what we're going to see in reality. And the best way to tell if it's too amplified is take a look at 500 millibar PVA. And if you see this type of signal showing up in this confluent pattern, so when I say confluent, notice how the 500 millibar heights are kind of coming together like that. When you see that type of signal, that means that there's some sort of convective feedback error in the model guidance. So you back off on that. I like the idea of scattered showers, but not a widespread heavy rainfall event because of this type of scenario setting up. It's more likely a stationary front, weak waves of low pressure, variable cloud cover, and scattered showers rather than this heavy rainfall signature. And by the way, you could also tell that there's some sort of error involved here when you start to get your precipitable water values on average around an inch and a half, and all of a sudden you get this spike around 2 inches. That's usually an error that's showing up in the guidance that you want to stay away from. So let's see what we got here. Now it's time to answer all of your questions. I think I went over pretty much everything I thought I was going to. Let's see. Everything's running well, I think, on Facebook. And the other locations. So looks like everything's going well. Yeah. So let's start off first with all the questions from premium members. As always, as a premium member, you get all your questions answered, even the crazy ones. And everyone else, I pick the best ones and we go from there. So let's see here. Cool marine air for the win, at least for today. Yep, and it will be for this weekend too. A lot of scattered broken cloud cover, stuff like that. Not seeing much in the way of rainfall. The next threat for rainfall for our region is Sunday afternoon, late afternoon, and in the evening. And even then, maybe a quarter of an inch, maybe. Like the update to the website with individual storm updates for tropical season. Yep, we're going to continue to test things out to try to improve functionality and to make it easier for you to find information. We took down some features because they may not have been as popular, and we're adding more features that are. Top scroll, outdoor activity rain is great. Will you continue that for the fall and winter seasons for frost, freeze, winter precip? I will see. Depends on how popular it is, and we'll go from there. Rob Allen asks, I'm curious how negative PDO plus and positive AMO regimes and light to moderate La Ninas for blocking regimes, particularly towards the end of summer. I think you get where I'm going. All right. I'm going to be very careful because I know what you're pointing at and what you're insinuating. It kind of depends on how this La Nina develops, orientation, strength, and whether we see it weakening by the time we get to the late fall season. And does that support the development of high latitude blocking? Now, part of that high latitude blocking also, something that we're going to be keeping an eye on, is remember the QBO, quasi-biennial oscillation? All right. The QBO has been in a negative state, right? East base. We're going to positive. The reason why this is important is that it reduces the potential for high latitude blocking. So the other time when we had a negative PDL and positive AMO regime, we also had a negative QBO regime. This time we won't. So it's a different environment in that respect from the stratospheric aspect of it, and the support for persistent high latitude blocking, which we're still involved in right now. We're still in that state right now, but we're changing. Okay. So as the stratospheric winds become more westerly than easterly, we'll lose that support for keeping high latitude blocking in place because our polar jet stream is going to become more progressive. It's going to be faster moving. It's not going to allow for those blocks to really lock in. It makes it far more difficult. So there is that factor. Of course, we're going to be keeping an eye on that and seeing how everything evolves. My one concern, as always, during the summer and fall season is to get an upper level low stuck around the Tennessee River Valley. When that happens, tropical mischief becomes a real problem for us. So we need to keep an eye on that. That's the one thing we do not want. Because that type of pattern tends to send tropical systems right towards the Jersey Shore. And we do not want that. Western Atlantic, north of the Caribbean and Bahamas looks well below normal. Do you anticipate that to persist? That factor, I think, has a lot to do with the state of our troughs over the Western Atlantic. I think we'll still see that signature towards the Northwestern Atlantic, towards Labrador, towards the Canadian Maritimes, Greenland. I think it's going to enhance the gradient with the Gulf Stream, and it's going to enhance the potential for storms to really intensify when they interact with cold fronts and lifting up towards the northern Atlantic, becoming major storms out there in the northern Atlantic. But I do expect for, let's say, around Bermuda, that whole area to modify because we're going to lose that trough influence and that Canadian maritime influence. Any more data with regard to La Nina orientation and strength? Not right now. I want to give it another week and see how this area of very cold water that's starting to show up, how it expands and grows, not only from the surface aspect, but also from the depth aspect, right? So I want to see how that circulation develops and how it expands. And once we get an idea on that, I think we'll get a better handle on the orientation and the strength. Where is Church? See, this is the thing. I'm not good with horses. I don't know where Churchill Down is. I don't know. You have to, Card. You're gonna have to let me know where that is. I don't really pay attention to any of the horse races or anything of that nature. But is it in Kentucky? I don't know. It's somewhere. Let's see here. When is it? Thursday, Saturday. So they have a horse race on Thursday and Saturday. I don't know. Well, Thursday's going to be dry for much of the East Coast, so that's good. Saturday, if it's around Kentucky, it's going to be raining, so I don't know if that matters or not. But hey, look, the way I see it, just give the horses hay and they'll run. It's all good, right? I don't know. Let's see here. Tropical Pacific has been remarkably quiet for a couple of years. Do you expect that to continue? Yes, absolutely. During La Nina, you get a lot of cold water. And remember, we had a La Nina for literally 3 years. So you had 3 years of inhibiting factors over the Eastern Pacific. I expect that to continue to be the case. The Western Pacific, that's going to be a little bit more tricky. I think we'll see some pretty impressive storms, though, in the Western Pacific. But the Eastern Pacific should be pretty quiet. Okay, Thursday through Sunday, they have preliminary races, so they don't just have one race. They have preliminary races. See, this is what I don't know. I watch baseball and football. By the way, I am not a fan of these Mets uniforms. I just want to put that out there. Kentucky Oaks is Friday and Derby on Saturday. Okay, well, Thursday and Friday looks pretty good around Kentucky. It's really Friday evening and Saturday. Looks like periods of showers, thunderstorms, so not looking the best for Saturday. Let's see what we got here on YouTube. Will this summer be a hot one? Humid. I think that's the key word for me this summer. Humid. If this ridge builds the way I think it's going to be, I think we're going to have a persistent southeast ridge / Bermuda high, and that's just going to pump tropical humid air. So it may not be 100 degrees, but it'll be 89 and feel like 99 because the humidity is high. So there is that factor. Well, this month has already featured backdoor cold fronts. We actually had one lingering today. Yes, I think that May will definitely feature plenty of backdoor cold fronts. That is for sure. Let's see, what else do we have here? Do we have anything on X tonight?
Nope.
All right.
And I checked Instagram and I didn't get you coming up live on there. So.
Okay, we gotta work on that. See, the thing with learning about social media is that it is okay to fail. I don't know whether or not this actually works. I don't know. We'll figure it out. See, the good thing is that we're trying it now before we get major storms. Much like we're testing out things for new shirts, we're testing out things with the website. We actually improved the website, put it into its own server. We're trying all this stuff now rather than when hurricanes impact and when we start to have winter storms eventually. I didn't want to do, like a lot of people wanted to test new things out then. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it in the middle of major storms. It's quiet. By the way, this is water. Someone asked.
Also.
Yep.
1 year, your new weather office.
Oh yeah, we're at a 1 year anniversary. That's a good point, honey. Last year at this time was the first official day we actually were officially moved into the weather office. Wow, it doesn't feel like that, doesn't it? It seems like it went fast, but a lot has changed. We have the diploma room up now. We have the CDM uh, certificate up officially on the wall. We have all the college university stuff, and man, it's pretty much
Zilla stuff.
all the Godzilla stuff and more Godzilla stuff that we're going to continue to keep on adding, I guess. But let's see here. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing with the horse races. I have a question on. Does the horse get a prize? Because I know that the guy gets like flowers and stuff or something. I guess he gets a check or something. But does the horse get like a reward, like oats or something of that nature? 'Cause I think that's only fair. What?
Fat juicy apple.
Yeah, good apple. I don't know apple pie. I have no clue, but I'm just thinking the horse did all the work, so they should get the bigger prize, right? I mean, do they get a cut of the money and they get like a free stable? I don't know how that works. Card, you're gonna have to tell me how that works. What does the horse get if it wins? Like, what's its motivation? I think that's a fair question. Because it's a horse. What if it's Mr. Ed? Didn't they do a movie about that? A talking horse?
Yeah, that was with Bobcat.
Yes, Bobcat. Yes, it was a guy with the horse
Trying to
was.
remember the name of it.
I forgot what the movie was called, but it was a horse, and it was psyching out all the other horses by talking to them. I personally would be freaked out by the fact that a horse is talking to me personally, but yeah, that was a great movie. So yeah, Card, your responsibility. I want to see in the chat. What does the horse win when the horse wins the race? That's what I want to know. And so for right now, it looks like in Kentucky for this race on Saturday, I guess what would you call it? A wet track? That it would definitely be a wet track out there. That is for sure. And let's see if there's anything going on out here other than that. How's it? 8:42. I must have really went out. Let's see if there's anything else on YouTube. Will we have severe weather this month? Not widespread. I can't rule out an isolated severe thunderstorm for the entire month of May, but it won't be a severe weather pattern. I'll put it that way, right? So if you're looking for widespread, if you're a storm chaser, you love chasing storms, taking pictures of storms, you want to head out towards the Ohio River Valley, Tennessee River Valley, Upper Midwest, Mississippi River Valley, and definitely the plains, Central Southern Plains. That's where you want to go. Northern Mid-Atlantic, maybe by the middle of the summer, especially when you get those humid air masses building in, but not for spring. Certainly not this month. Of all the oscillations, which one's most relevant for La Nina summers? Oh, that's a good one. Good. Okay. All right. Now that's a good one. I think for me, during La Nina summers, the state and intensity of the negative PDO. I'll tell you why. There isn't a lot of forcing mechanisms during the summer to really watch out for. You don't really have a lot of stratospheric influences. You watch warm pockets, but that's kind of fleeting. Of course, you have your El Nino or La Nina states. But during a La Nina state, if you have an intensifying negative PDO, it amplifies the La Nina state. So it's like La Nina on steroids, right? So if you have a negative PDO really establishing itself and enhancing cold water down the west coast, then that enhances the whole La Nina circulation. It enhances the relationship that you see with the polar and subtropical jet streams, and what you end up with very impressive deep troughs around the Rockies and plains, significant severe weather outbreaks. And the reason why that's important is that the severe weather outbreaks, that all that latent heat energy, all that release helps to pump up and build the ridge to the east down towards the Gulf Coast, which then in turn starts to build up the ridge up towards the mid-Atlantic and towards our neck of the woods. So it's kind of like a cumulative effect. It kind of adds back on itself, right? So it all starts with the negative PDO, which is what I'm watching. If we had a neutral state or we had a positive PDO, then this La Nina influence would be muted a bit, okay? But with a negative PDO, it becomes more amplified. So that oscillation for me, other people may have different opinions, but it all starts with that because then that starts to change the state of the EPO in terms of the 500 millibar pattern. You get more and more positive EPO states, and it displaces and forces the other oscillations like the NAO and the Arctic oscillation. It displaces it to the north because you have that building ridge. Also, I have to touch on it, with global warming and with the enhancement of precipitable water values, you're going to see colder stratospheric environments. And so with that colder stratospheric environment, you're going to have the higher potential for above normal 500 millibar heights, which enhances surface heat and so on and so forth. So everything's kind of all connected. So you kind of add everything together. But for me, it all starts with what are we dealing with in the Pacific and what is that state of the PDO in terms of enhancing that La Nina state. What are your thoughts on flash flooding and severe thunderstorms? Flash flooding is always a concern with severe thunderstorms, first of all, because especially in a La Nina environment, you have these storms that just kind of gradually, slowly move, which can lead to some very heavy rainfall and training in aspects. Again, for this spring, I'm not seeing any type of widespread heavy rainfall rainfall pattern. What I am concerned about in the summer is for you start to establish the tropical air mass and you get these cold fronts that approach and die out. And then you start to develop these mesoscale boundaries that becomes kind of like echoes of previous thunderstorms. So you get some areas where you kind of get a dry environment at the lower levels, and you get these microscale gradients that's set up. So here, let me go pull this up. Okay, so let me zoom in on this here. See if I can, again, pay no attention to the surface map. Just this map here, right? So what we watch out for in the summer is that, again, you have this tropical air mass and you have your sea breeze front that starts to develop and you get these thunderstorms, let's say, to start to keep on showing up around central Monmouth County down through Cumberland, let's say, okay? Now, with that environment setting up, it leads to a feedback process where you get above normal rainfall and high levels of moisture, low level moisture, but you get very dry conditions here. So when a thunderstorm complex approaches from the west, it weakens here and then intensifies here because you have a very dry environment and a very moist environment. So you can get these microscale factors to start to influence your thunderstorm development and leads to some areas with flash flooding and other areas barely getting a drop. So it's a feedback process. The other thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on is the influence of urban heat island effect. So remember, on the I-95 corridor, you have a lot of concrete, a lot of buildup, a lot of heat. That heat rises, enhances thunderstorm development, and it leads to very heavy rainfall events as a result. That is one of the factors of man-influencing environment in which that you have that urban heat island effect enhancing your thunderstorms. Keep an eye, for example, around Newark, around the airport. You get these heavy thunderstorms that stall out, that move very slowly, and you get these very heavy rainfall events. And of course, the final thing to always keep an eye on is the potential for remnant tropical low pressure systems. So that again, I think we'll cover that more when we actually get those remnant lows to develop. Because what I'm going to want to show you is not just the remnant low, but we're going to take a look at and we're going to study the precipitable water values associated with that. And we're going to look at how high it is and how enhanced it is, and then compare that to the environment. And one of the things I want to show, and one of the things that I pick up in terms of, when we talk about climate change, the difference in the elevated nature of these tropical systems now with the precipitable water value that's available. When we start to go into 3 and 4 inch and 5 inch levels, that's when we have some serious problems. If you remember a couple of years ago, that's also when you do not have a party or New York City having a outing in the middle of a hurricane like they did a couple of years ago. Hopefully they learned their lesson on that one. Let's see here. That card has some. Let's see. It depends. The stallion, after running for a couple of years, gets put out. Studs suspect the stallions like that. Okay, so they get to retire and have kids. Okay, I think that if the horse wins, they get as much oats as they want, whatever food they like, and they also get to ride the jockey. That's what I think. I think that's fair. The jockey has to carry the horse. Because, the horse did all the work. There are different degrees of wet. Well, if it's thunderstorms as it's looking at, it's going to be a pretty wet track. Because it's going to be raining overnight and then into the day. Northern Mid-Atlantic and Northeast are the wrong part of the country to be regular storm chasers. Yes, I would say definitely. If you really want to be a storm chaser, which I always caution, look, if you're going to be chasing thunderstorms, please do not get in the way of law enforcement and ambulances and all that stuff and fire trucks. Stay far away. When I did storm chasing back when I was young and stupid, out in Oklahoma, I'd make sure I was well enough away, mostly because I was terrified by what I was seeing, but also because you can take some great pictures. If you're too close to the storm, where you're literally in the rainfall and hail shaft, you made a mistake and you need to leave. I think my old college, SUNY Oswego, they actually do a trip out to the plains to do that. It's pretty cool. Also, if you're not too far to the west of that rising urban heat island, it tends to suppress showers and thunderstorms when they fire up to the east. Yes, the urban heat island effect can enhance thunderstorms, but also leads to subsidence just to the west. That's absolutely true. Some great questions here tonight. And it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'll take a few more, and then we are done for the night. And I saved my voice. Anything on X tonight?
Nope.
No. X is quiet tonight. That's okay. We're saving up the questions for when it really gets active around here. See that we have plenty of activity here on LinkedIn. I'm surprised we have a couple of followers on LinkedIn. I didn't know. LinkedIn, I figured, what the hell? I'll just give it a shot. And showed up pretty nicely. Look at that. And I don't know whether it showed up on Facebook correctly or not. So we're going to have to investigate. Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. So it worked on Facebook. So we just got to figure out Instagram. Instagram's always a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
I don't know why. What factors would cause the PDO to weaken? We'd have to see a change in first the surface winds and pressure to get that warmer water around the central Pacific to start to push towards the west coast. We'd also have to see a change in the evolution of the subsurface, which we're not seeing. So usually the PDO varies back and forth every 12 to 18 months. So I'm not expecting any significant change going back to weakening. In fact, I only expect it to intensify through, let's say, October, and then it'll start to weaken a little bit as we head towards the winter. But usually what I'm looking for is a change in pressure features. So, for example, if we started to see a more significant forcing mechanism, like we get to the winter and the polar vortex splits and displaces off towards the Aleutian Islands, for example. Or we saw a fundamental shift taking place with ENSO, right? That starts to change and starts to change the forcing mechanisms. What impacts does a negative PDO have during winter season? Typically what it does is that, like I said, it kind of helps to enhance the La Nina effect. You tend to get more below normal heights on the west coast and more above normal heights on the southeast coast. You also tend to have a displaced negative NAO more towards an east-based negative NAO towards Iceland than you do towards Greenland and not Greenland, the Canadian Maritimes and 50 North, 50 West. Or 50-50 low. And with that, my voice is starting to go. So I think we're going to call it a night before my voice completely goes for whatever reason. Thank you, as always, for asking outstanding questions about the PDO. I really appreciate the outstanding, great questions from YouTube and, of course, as always, our premium members. Thank you, as always. Let's hope the Mets actually win this game. And as always, stay safe out there.